Star Wars has some pretty odd alien species, which, we'd argue, is one of the franchise's biggest charms. We mentioned one of them in a recent video about the Lurmen, a species of lemur-like beings who had settled on Maridun. But the Lurmen weren't the only sentients on Maridun. Apart from their village, the planet was mostly inhabited by the Amanin, also known as the Amani. The Amanin were a species of 3-meter tall flatworms that curled up into balls to roll around the grasslands of their homeworld, and though they're somewhat obscure, they've got some fascinating lore behind them. In this video, we'll be telling their story.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
First, let's quickly discuss terminology. The proper plural name for this species is Amanin, but if you've heard of these guys, it's probably under the name Amani. Amani is the singular form of the word, but it's frequently used as a plural in Star Wars media, most notably in the unfinished Crystal Crisis story arc from the Clone Wars, which is likely where any of you who've heard of these guys first heard of them. All the same, we'll be using Amanin going forward. The Amanin were planarians, which is to say flatworms with tall, broad bodies, long arms, and short, stubby legs. On average, they stood between 2 to 3 meters in height, and they had no noticeable sexual dimorphism, meaning males and females looked pretty much the same. They had 4 digits on their hands and feet, which were tipped with claws. Their arms were meant for climbing the trees of Maridun, and they were long and thin with fingers to match. Amani's legs, to contrast, were short and stocky, giving Amanin an extremely slow walking speed. Amanin also had short tails and extremely long necks, which were broad and flat. Their skin was thicker on their backs and formed a sort of hood at their heads, which featured flat faces with wide mouths and small red eyes. Amanin had very thick skin, which was usually colored yellow with green highlights on their backs. Their skin secreted a toxic slime that both kept them safe from predators and kept their bodies moist. Their wide mouths could open far enough to swallow prey whole, and Amanin also had long, prehensile tongues. Like most kind of worms, Amanin also used their mouths to expel waste, though those who lived away from Maridun preferred to do so in private to avoid grossing out members of other species. Amanin were tough, and they were highly adapted to life on their wild homeworld. Their skin pigmentation provided camouflage in the forests and grasslands they called home, while their poisonous slime made them inedible to all but one of Maridun's predators, with the exception being the crocodilian Sharnoks. Amanin had a redundant organ system, meaning they had multiple copies of each of their vital organs spread throughout their bodies, allowing them to survive even the most grievous of wounds. They could regenerate lost body parts, and their nervous system was so decentralized that it was theorized that an Amanin that was cut in half would eventually regrow into 2 identical Amanin. They also had excellent senses of smell and keen night vision, and they were natural tree climbers. Their stubby legs made their walking speed incredibly slow, but the Amanin made up for this by curling up into wheels and rolling as a form of locomotion. Across open grasslands, Amanin could roll at up to 50 kilometers per hour. As you could probably tell from that description, the Amanin were absolute units, and there was little that could seriously threaten them. Their homeworld, Maridun, was a lively world and full of dangerous predators, but only the Sharnoks posed a threat to the Amanin, and Amanin warriors could fend them off with enough effort. Much of Maridun was dominated by sprawling meadows and grasslands, which the Amanin called the Gruntak. But they instead preferred to live in the pockets of rainforest that dotted the planet, as these wetter regions were better for their skin, which needed constant moisture. Amanin, nonetheless, ventured out into the open plains now and again, looking for resources, new rainforests to settle, or to do battle with other Amanin. The Amanin were a pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer society, living simply in tribal villages led by lawkeepers who recorded the oral histories and traditions of their people. They never developed much technology, likely because they didn't really need to. After all, they were perfectly suited to their niche in Maridun's environment. For time immemorial, they lived mostly peaceful lives in the rainforests, with only the occasional migration or war shaking things up. The latter was known as a takital to the Amanin, and it was usually ceremonial in nature, somewhat similar to the real-world flower wars of the Aztec Empire. When two Amanin tribes came into conflict, usually over settlement of a patch of rainforest, they would roll across the grasslands to a designated sacred space, which would serve as their battlefield. The two tribes would then fight to resolve their disputes, with the fighting often stopping prematurely once one side made its point. The Ricardo of the Infinite Empire was the first alien power to lay claim to Maridun, but they left no trace of their presence, and the Amanin didn't seem to be affected by the Infinite Empire at all. After the fall of the Infinite Empire, the Amanin were left in peace for 20,000 years. During the last few millennia of the Republic, scouts from the greater galaxy stumbled across Maridun, but the Republic never attempted to establish colonies on the planet for fear of the mighty Amanin. Maridun was thus little known in the Republic, and the only off-worlders who came to the planet were the usual occasional runaways looking for a place to lay low. Thus, it wasn't until the Republic's last decades that the Amanin really became acquainted with the greater galaxy. The first colony of off-worlders to be established in Maridun was a small village of Lerman pacifists who fled their homeworld of Magito at the outbreak of the Clone Wars and hoped to find peace on Maridun. The Amanin attacked their ship as soon as they landed, and to prevent bloodshed, the Lerman leader, Tiwat Ka, gave them the ship and departed far from any Amanin settlements to build their village. The Lerman lived out in the plains, and after their initial encounter with the Amanin, the two species seemed to have left each other alone. Prior to the Clone Wars, some Amanin tribes seem to have travelled off-world and settled on the windswept surface and deep caves of Utapau. These Amanin lived in their own settlements apart from Utapau's sinkhole cities, living as hunter-gatherers and generally following the same customs and lifestyles as their brethren back on Maridun. Some of these Amanin picked up the use of blasters from the native Pawans and Utai, and a few rogue Amanin gained a reputation as fierce fighters and guns for hire. Some of these Amanin were hired by General Grievous to act as bodyguards during arms deals with the Sugi, while the Sugi recruited a few of the Utapauan Amanin tribes to provide security for their landing sites. The Amanin on Maridun, meanwhile, kept out of galactic affairs until 11 BBY, when the Empire laid claim to Maridun. The next year, the Imperials began establishing military bases and mining operations out in Maridun's grasslands, and Imperial-aligned slavers occasionally came to the planet to capture Amanin slaves. For 10 years, the Amanin offered little resistance, as the Empire was out in the grasslands and only attacked individual warriors travelling between settlements. In 0 BBY, however, a company of Imperial stormtroopers under General Ziering accidentally crossed the borders of one of the Amanin's sacred battlefields, and one of the Amanin tribes declared them to be participants in a takital. In the bloody 2-day Battle of Maridun, the Amanin tore the Imperials a new one, killing General Ziering and 90% of the stormtroopers present, along with 2 juggernauts and their crews. To make things worse for the Imperials, the Amanin took the blasters of their fallen foes and quickly figured out how to use them. The Imperials were reduced to a few men and a lone ATTE, and those who remained only survived because, on the second day, the lawkeeper of the Amanin tribe declared that the Imperials had proved themselves in Takital and were worthy of peace with his people. The unit's surviving commanding officer wisely accepted this offer of peace, and he brokered a deal with the tribe, promising that the Empire would keep off Amanin's sacred lands. In exchange, the tribe promised to hand over every Amani they captured in battles with other tribes to Imperial slavers. The Empire struck similar agreements with other major Amanin tribes, and Amanin slaves steadily began to spread across the galaxy. The Empire eventually moved out of Maridun, but unfortunately for the Amanin, the Hutts and other criminal interests moved in, picking up the Empire's share of the slave trade. Many Amanin slaves escaped and returned to Maridun, blasters and other technology, allowing them to usurp control of their tribes. Cities began to form around the old Imperial spaceports, which became havens for outcasts and criminals, and the peace of Maridun slowly faded into memory. Well, that was a depressing ending, but the Amanin were still pretty cool regardless. What do you think? Have you heard of them before? Let us know what you think about them in the comment section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.